Coming to you from Studio HQ, you're tuning in to Thinking the Extra. Coming to you from Comic Crusaders, I am Dodgy in the mix. Meet up with our amazing guest. But before I dive in, let me check out our sponsors. Are you an aspiring comic creator but don't have the tools? Look no further than Thamon Comic Creations. There are sessions available for all ages and different levels of experience. If location is an issue, that is not an issue, as classes can be held digitally via Zoom. Jump onto thamoncomiccreations.com. And October 1st is Buy Indie Comics Day. If you're a creator like my guest today, reach out to your local comic book store, make it an event, celebrate local creators. It's Artist Alley in your local LCS. With me today is a creator coming up with an awesome book. I mean, if you haven't checked it out, you really are missing out. And that is Mara. I have with me today Dylan Goss. Welcome, Dylan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I know at the moment you're based in Taiwan, but growing up, you started your life, you grew up in Southern Illinois, and eventually you and your family moved to Belize. Where in this journey did you discover the joy of comics?
Well, when we were still in the state, we moved when I was pretty young, but there was a period where we were going back and forth. And during that back and forth period, my dad happened upon a yard sale, as you do. You weren't looking for a yard sale. You never are, but you see it
Of
and you
course.
go, right? And he
Yeah.
found boxes of comics for $1 a box. At
Mhm.
$1 a box, and he filled up the back of his pickup, right?
Nice.
And it was mostly Marvel. It was a
Mhm.
lot of Spider-Man. I would say Spider-Man and X-Men were
Mhm.
they were the two major ones in there. I know there's all different types of Spider-Man, of course. Ultimate Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, right? And
Mhm.
a lot of these comics were from the 70s. They
Mhm.
were older than I am. And
Yeah.
there was a bit of DC, not a whole lot of DC. Almost all of that was Wonder Woman.
Okay.
Um, and then there were a few odd entries, like a single issue of Lobo. I
Mhm.
remember that one because it was only the one issue, and
Yeah.
he was fighting Santa Claus on the cover.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But at that, I really dove into comics, right? And I really
Mhm.
liked Peter Parker because he wasn't a hero from the very start. He was
True.
always a really clever guy and kind of a nerd and got picked on. And
Mhm.
and he got his powers, and he didn't immediately say, "Oh, well, I'm going to go save the world." No,
Mhm.
he did what I feel like a lot of people would do in his situation. It's like, well, I got these powers, they're for me. I'm going to do something for me with it. And, he grew into realizing, into
Mm.
understanding his responsibility, as we've all, all the movies drilled into as the word responsibility. But they kind of glaze over it, just how long he wasn't being responsible.
Of
And to me, that
course.
made him a lot more human. All right. So
True.
Peter Parker was a big influence on my writing. But it
Mhm.
didn't occur to me until much later that I wanted to get into comics myself. I always
Mhm.
just had this idea that, well, if you want to get into comics, you need to be able to draw. And
Yeah.
it didn't occur to me to really even look at the credit sections, because if I had, I would have seen that there was a writer and there was you know, an illustrator, or actually multiple illustrators, like lines
Yeah.
and colors. Yeah,
Mhm.
so that didn't even occur to me at that age. When I was in my 20s, I wanted to get into video game creation because I'm a
Mhm.
software developer by trade, and I thought,
Yeah.
oh, this is the best way for me to tell stories, right?
Mhm.
But as a storytelling medium, video games aren't the best. Like, you can have an amazing story in a game,
Of
but that's not what
course.
makes a game good. And that
Mhm.
was my major folly, because I wasn't making a fun game. I was trying to tell my story, and it really should have clicked immediately, because instead of cutscenes, I had an artist draw up comic pages, and somehow it still didn't click in my head that I wanted to do comics. That didn't happen until much later.
Yeah.
What really was the thing that drove it home for me was I saw Logan in the theater with my
Mm-hmm.
wife, and Daphne Keene's first appearance on screen, that fight scene, and how they portrayed her as being so animalistic, like she was almost an animal first before a person in that scene, and that really stuck with me because as a superhero movie, Logan really is an outlier, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
it is an amazing movie.
Mm-hmm.
There, of all the feedback I've seen, very little of it has been negative for Logan, right?
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
I mean, not everything is for everybody, but most of the people who saw Logan really, really liked it, and I was definitely in that camp. And you know that that character was just bouncing around in my head, and especially how she became more and more human later on. She was nonverbal at first, and then
Yes.
at one point she got mad at Logan and started yelling at him in Spanish, and he's like, "You can talk," you know. so,
I know,
so
right?
she really came into a more verbal, a more mature character as time went on, and I really liked that character development.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just bouncing around in my head for the longest time. And Mara, the character Mara, is largely based on her performance there.
You can obviously see that since you brought it up. I just had a light bulb moment. I was like, yes, because I mean, for those of you who haven't seen the image, here she is, and you're right because she has that. Obviously brought up in a tough life. She's had things that have happened to her to cause her to go this different avenue of where she was prior. Don't want to give away too many spoilers, but the introduction to the story, she was a sweet little girl, and then eventually things had happened and she went the opposite direction. Um, but in terms of the story, where was the overall influence besides the character, but the setting, the location? Where did all this come about, Dylan?
The world itself is largely inspired by the Dungeons and Dragons setting, Dark Sun. Dark Sun is a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The gods are all
Mhm.
dead. It's actually a much worse world than the one I set Mara in, but
Wow.
it does have a lot of similarities.
Mhm.
The metal scarcity, the water scarcity, those are things that I took from there, and the lack of a day-night cycle. That was a really unique thing to me for a world to not have a day-night cycle. Um, and I really liked that because in the this is going to be revealed in later issues because Mara herself doesn't know a lot of the world history, so she has to
Mhm.
learn it as she goes. Uh, but what happened was there's a war between the gods, and they destroyed the sun. And when they destroyed the sun, they set the sky on fire. So now there is no day-night cycle, and as you can imagine, that was just an ecological disaster, unprecedented
Mhm.
proportions.
Yeah.
Uh, So when I say that her tribe used to be a winter tribe
Mhm.
and now they have the only river around, you can imagine how devastating it was and how little of the population of this world would have survived. Because if you lived in a hot climate before that happened, it would be completely uninhabitable.
Yes, exactly. But let's take a few steps back. So, as I mentioned before, you lived in Taiwan for a number of years now, and you mentioned that your wife had introduced you to manga.
Yeah.
Um, where did that influence? Did that have anything to do with the story of Mara as well?
Yeah. So the first mangas I started reading was it was Naruto and Inuyasha. Those are some entry level mangas that
Hmm.
you can get into, right? And I remember there's something called a social contract in fiction, especially in movies. But in all fiction, you where you live and where a movie or a comic or a manga is made is going to determine how the audience expects it to interact with characters. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
social contract for American fiction, the good guy always wins, is a very, very common trope. Now,
Really is.
obviously, not every single one the good guy wins, but you expect that. If you watch a Hollywood
Mm-hmm.
movie, you expect the good guys to win. And if they don't win in the first one, you expect a sequel where they're going to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why so many people, I think, were gutted when, when the finger snap happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they fixed that in a sequel, but people were just so caught off guard when this happened, right? They just expected, oh well, he's the bad guy, he's going to lose. Uh, in in Korean fiction and Japanese fiction, the good guy is not necessarily going to win, and in fact, it's not an expectation going in. And even
Oh.
if the good guy wins, he doesn't necessarily get a happy ending. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes your situation is just awful, and there isn't a whole lot you can do about it. And so, what I'm getting at here is that I largely took the social contract from that because it really expanded my options mentally.
True.
If you only have influence from Hollywood films, then you're going to have a Hollywood ending. You're going to have a Hollywood pacing, and while that's not necessarily a bad thing, you know, variety is the spice of life, right?
Yeah,
So
100%.
yeah. So while Mara survives this comic, she isn't necessarily, getting a happy ending, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's okay. It's not okay for her, obviously, but it's okay from a storytelling perspective to not always have the protagonist get everything they want.
Yes. And I think too that also leads to the reader wanting to catch more because they want to see Mara get some happiness or get some thrills out of life. So if you just have everything happy, 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 you're not really giving too much depth to the storytelling. I think that's a really good idea, Dylan. I think that's an amazing way of looking at it. And to be honest with you, I didn't really know a whole lot about the social contract coming from the eastern side of the border because, again, like I'm more into American comics. I do like some overseas movies, but they haven't been that far off from what we get from America. So yeah, I think that's a really good way, really good perspective. Um, just in terms of Mara, like where did the and you started the script obviously. When did the balls roll? Like when did you start to go? Okay, now I need to get an artist. Now I need to make this happen. What did your overall steps look like?
I What I did first before reaching out to an artist, what I put it together like a slideshow with reference art and story bits to
Hmm.
see kind of how I wanted it to play out, because
Hmm.
writing a script is one thing, but seeing even something close to what you want
Yeah.
is another, because it it will help you realize, oh, maybe this wasn't a good idea, or maybe I should
Hmm.
lean further into this, right? And once I had that, I reached out to artist contact of mine, because if you're doing software development, you're going to have designer contact,
Of
especially
course.
if you do freelance like I did for a few years. I reached out to her because I knew she did some comics, and she said, "Well, I like this, but it's fantasy. I don't do fantasy. I only do sci-fi. I can
Mhm.
I can reach out to a few of my friends." Now, she really downplayed what she was about to do for me. Uh, what she did was she sent out a message to all of her art school contacts,
Mm-hmm.
And artists know a lot more artists than other people do.
I
So
would
I had
imagine.
15 emails in my inbox that night.
Wow.
And, I couldn't hire them all, of course.
Of course.
Some were better than others. They were all good, but
Mhm.
some were better than others. I narrowed it down to 3, and then I gave them all a commission. I said, give me a reference art of what you think Mara looks like. And uh, that would help me not only evaluate their style, but also evaluate how they interpret my script writing.
Yeah.
And when Rosie's art came back, and it came back first, I I had to kind of force myself to wait for the other two to come back because I saw this and I realized, I want to see more of what this person is drawing. And if
Mm-hmm.
I want to see more, then hypothetically at least, readers would want to see more. But
Yes.
more importantly, I'm excited about what she's doing with my script.
Mm-hmm.
And originally, so Mara's tribe is based on both the real life Viking and Inuit.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of an interpretation of what their tribe would have become in if they were suddenly subjected to hot weather, because those are both cold weather tribes, right? Those are
Yes,
both
of
cold
course.
weather peoples.
Mm-hmm.
And so was Mara's at first, but then the disaster happened, right? And they had to adapt very,
Mm-hmm.
very quickly. Uh,
Yeah.
so when I got the others back, um, Rosie had leaned furthest into the Inuit influence,
Mm.
and the others were mostly in the Viking influence, and they weren't bad, but
Mm-hmm.
they also weren't as unique because there's a lot of Viking fiction out there. And
Now
of
that,
course
yeah.
there is, right? Because it's really cool. I mean, you can't
Mm-hmm.
blame anyone for thinking Vikings are cool. I mean, come on.
No, of course not.
But I saw something unique, right? I don't see a lot of first people's representation in comics.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's not if it's not something common, then it's going to be more interesting to me by default.
Yeah.
Because if it is common, then everybody's doing it, and I've probably seen it a few times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we, I offered her the job, and she accepted. And while
Mm-hmm.
we were world building, while I was explaining the world to her, it actually steered my writing more into the Inuit influence. And Rosie does have a fair amount of creative control.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I don't think that has taken away anything from my writing. And I think that's the important part. When you give someone
Yes.
creative control, you don't want to lose anything, you know.
No,
But
definitely not.
her influence has, been a net positive. It has only added to it, right?
Okay.
So when I talk about her tribe adapting quickly, they lost their native language because they were no longer self-sustaining. They needed to trade in order to
Yes.
survive, and they picked up the common language. So their old writings, which would have been in Inuktitut, were eventually lost, and their spirit guardian they now call Amaru, which just means wolf in
Yeah.
Inuktitut, because they misunderstood the writings. They didn't understand the language very well anymore, and they took that to be his name. But because he's a spirit and they kept calling him that, that became his name.
Mm. So yeah, I find that astonishing because I thought that you might have, delved into the Inuit and maybe studied a bit of the language or studied some things in order to create the story, but it came the other way around. It came from the artist actually coming up with this design. So and kudos to you to to allow the artist to take some form of creative control for the design and you working around it and also keeping your input as well. But what were some of the challenges in in this transformation, in this change of, I guess, your thinking as well as the direction that Mara was going? What were some of the challenges?
Well, we had to try a few times to settle on a script format.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the Marvel method is a good format, but
It is.
you know, just because it's used professionally doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing for your team. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
selecting a script format or uh, a collaborative application or really anything that the entire team is going to use, you select what's best for your team, not what's considered the best in the world, because that might not
That's
be
true.
what's best for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what we settled on looks more like a novelization with a heavy visual focus.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you read a novel, they will do their best to incorporate all five senses.
Mm-hmm.
But with a comic, you only get the other senses by way of the reaction of the characters.
Yes.
Right? Obviously, you can draw in a sound effect, but if there's a smell, you only know there's a smell because somebody has commented on it or scrunched
Mm-hmm.
up their nose or something like that, right?
Yeah,
You don't have that you don't have that ability to make people mentally visualize what's going on. You have to actually show them.
that's
So
true.
yeah, so that's a script format we settled on, and some panels are explicitly laid out and some are not.
Mm-hmm.
I asked her before if she wanted all panels explicitly laid out, and she doesn't really want that. She wants to be able to handle some of the paneling herself, and I'm happy to let her do that.
Yeah, that's really really interesting. But in terms of the names, did you actually do some research? Did you study a bit of the Inuit in order to show some authenticity to the story and characters?
Yeah, I had to work pretty hard on the pronunciation of
Hmm.
Amaru because it has a throat sound which we don't have in English.
Yes,
Um, and it's it's not the most fun part of it, but I thought it had to be done, right?
yeah,
If you're going to use something as an influence, you need to understand it.
100%. Yeah,
Even if that makes your tongue do weird things when you're trying to pronounce it later on, right? Because I'm not
yeah,
used to it. If it was my first language, I'm sure it would be flawless. You
yeah.
know,
Of course.
I'm sure my pronunciation still isn't perfect now, but
Hmm.
um, I've I've definitely put in the work, so it's not a situation of me not respecting the culture or the language. It's just the limitations of my ability based on how I was raised.
Yeah.
Um, and there is actually a lot of good linguistic information on Inuktitut online.
Hmm.
Uh, you can find sound clips of people with different regional dialects pronouncing
Okay.
different words. And I was actually kind of surprised by that. And
Yeah,
that's a very thorough cataloging. I'm
yeah.
glad those resources exist.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very brave of you. I mean, it's one thing to actually write and show it in words, but to actually go out of your way to actually listen to the pronunciation. Because to be honest with you, unless you're having to explain certain things, that's the only time you would need to speak it. But as a writer, it's yeah, like I'm very impressed. Like, uh, so let me just ask you again. So you created this book and then you had to come up with a publisher name. Where did the name Stuffed Rock come from?
So,
I'm interested.
this name I actually came up with this when I was trying to do video games before, and I really liked
Mhm.
it, so I kept it. It was the only part of that attempt at video games that I ended up liking. Um,
Mhm.
and I just really liked the idea of, you know, such a subversion of expectations. You know, you think of a plush toy, a rock is the absolute last thing on your mind.
I know, right? You wouldn't have that in your bed with your arms around it. And who created the image that you've got there of the logo?
That was actually the same artist that I contacted before and asked if she wanted to do the comic. That is Lois Liao is her name,
Lastly,
and yeah,
right.
she created the lettering and the image, the logo itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I had the idea for it, because it can't. The idea was originally we were going to have one of the little logo animations, like you typically
Mm-hmm.
see at the start of a game when you're loading it up,
Yes,
of
exactly.
this family veering off a road and plowing into a boulder, but nothing happens to the car because it's actually a plush toy, and then the
Yeah.
little girl comes out and hugs it, and that's where this logo comes from. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm disappointed I didn't get to see that. That's awesome. So now, in terms of your aspiration to become a writer, you started to write games, and you know where did that actually come about? Were there anyone that you followed? Um, any writers in particular that you aspired to be like? Who are your influences?
I really looked up to Stephen King.
Stephen
Growing up,
King.
yeah, growing up, I had a lot of Stephen King books growing up. Also Isaac Asimov. I
Mhm.
We had these. I don't remember the name of it anymore. They're definitely older than I am, but they were little digest-sized magazines with a lot of sci-fi short stories. And Isaac Asimov was a big contributor. Had some of his novels, but most of the writing I had from him uh, came in those
Mhm.
books. And the short stories really helped me uh, get a better perspective, because with comic books, you got to keep the status quo going, right?
Yes.
Especially the mainstream Marvel comics. Uh,
Mhm.
Spider-Man's going to be around for a long time, right?
True.
Uh, but these short stories, you could blow up the world in 1,000 words, and it wouldn't matter because that's the end of your story, right?
Yeah.
And that really helped me, get a grasp on the fact that not all storytelling has to happen the same way.
Yeah. That's
And
true.
the other thing I that really drove me to fantasy was actually D&D. When I was very young,
Mhm.
yard sale again, I found three tabletop games. Uh,
Nice.
the first one was the Red Box Starter Set D&D. It was second edition.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, it was second edition. It was from '76, I believe,
Oh wow.
and there was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and there was a more obscure one called Top Secret SI,
Okay.
um, and they were $10 each. I only had $10, and at that age, I was just like, well, the dragon looks cool on big red box. I'm gonna grab this one, so I bought it, and when when we were leaving, the woman running the yard sale came up to my mom's car, the driver's side window, and said, "Hey, your son was the only one who showed any interest in these, so he should just have the other two as well."
Oh,
Yeah, so that was a good day for me.
100%. Yeah, you've been on
Yeah,
top of the world.
yeah, and that really drove me towards fantasy storytelling,
Hmm.
because D&D is basically just collaborative storytelling.
It absolutely is. Ad hoc, go with the flow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've been playing it ever since. Right, I play other tabletop games as well as a direct result of this encounter. So I guess I would say it. been about 25 years of me playing tabletop games, maybe closer to 30. So yeah, that definitely influenced my my getting into fantasy.
Yeah. And yeah, so and then were there any comic book influences? So we talked about, D&D, you talked about like actual writers, but in terms of comic books, what were you reading that actually also helped your influence?
Besides Spider-Man, there was also X-Men, and I really liked Kitty Pryde. And Kitty Pryde
Yeah,
dealt with some pretty heavy stuff. All
she
right,
did.
and the whole mutie slur,
Yeah.
that was a big deal. And I distinctly remember one scene from one comic where she was working on the ship, right?
Hmm.
And she was half phased through the wall, but she couldn't be completely phased through specific parts, because if she phases through electronics, she fries them.
Yes, exactly.
And she had to be the one to do this, because if someone else was going to do it, they would have to rip the whole thing apart, and it would take a month longer, or something to that effect, right?
Hmm.
And she's having this internal monologue while doing this work about how difficult it is to partly phase, and how if she makes a mistake, she'll fry the ship. But it was
Hmm.
never, you know, well, I'm just so cool, I can do this thing even though it's really hard. The
Yeah.
tone was more, this is really hard, but it's worth doing. So I need to push myself to be better.
Hmm.
And that had a big impact on me.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, the whole idea that, a character isn't necessarily perfect, and isn't necessarily having even a good time with the situation, but because they recognize it as something that not only needs to be done, but is good for their personal growth. And that's a thing that a lot of heroes don't really have. A lot of the time they're already there. And I've
True.
never liked that. I've always liked when people grow into it more.
Hmm. Yeah, because you're right. Because I mean, over the years, I mean, Kitty Pride has grown a lot. She started as Sprite, went into Kitty Pride, and then to Shadowcat, and then becoming the leader of the Avengers at one point, and being Star Lord. Like, there's been so much growth, and I just like the way Chris Claremont carried that story, and how she's got that social angst as well. She was like basically some of the readers that were reading at the time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And like, comparing that to one of the other major female characters in comics that I was reading at the time, Wonder
Hmm.
Woman. I mean, she's Wonder Woman. You
Yeah.
know, you can't touch her. She's she is already there. And, she doesn't
Hmm.
win every time, not the first time at least, but she's just so powerful.
Yeah.
It's kind of the Superman problem, right? Eh,
Absolutely.
of course, a lot of people like Superman, and I'm not going to dunk on anybody for liking Superman. That's
Mhm.
ridiculous. But they also there are also a lot of people who don't like Superman just because of how amazing he is, and that's the Wonder Woman problem. She is just so amazing that
Yeah.
it's less relatable, you
Of
know.
course.
And
Yeah.
depending on the writer, she might be more humanized.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, Clark Kent has had some good writers over the years, of course,
Mhm.
but it's just not going to connect the same way.
Yeah, that's so true. Let me ask you about this art here. So we're looking at this image. It's mind blowing, just to say the least. But where was the conversation? What was the conversation like with Rosie in terms of creating this sort of layout for the spirit animals to be talking to each other?
So we actually sat down and created the spirit world before
Hmm.
diving into this, and the the little points of light you see all around them are actually
Mhm.
lesser spirits. You have to
Ah.
have a very you either have to be specifically called forward or have a very strong presence of mind to fully
Mhm.
form in the spirit world. These two are spirit guardians of the tribe. They are worshipped by the tribe, so they have a very strong presence of mind and sense of
Yeah.
self.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
most of the spirits there are just, spirits of the dead, and the average person is just that, right?
mhm. And what did it look like when you were having the conversation with Rosie? Did it come out exactly how you wanted it, or were there some challenges there with trying
Well,
to
there
communicate?
were some challenges. It was mostly her trying to make sure she understood, so there was some
Mhm.
back and forth, and there's a whole write up on it now with a lot of
Mhm.
reference art. But the way the borders are drawn, that's a specific part of the world as well. If
Yeah.
uh, if you are not looking at something in the spirit world, it effectively doesn't exist,
Mhm.
which is why the world is simply cut off when nobody is looking.
Yeah, and that's why all the panels look abstract. I think it looks amazing, and and in the end, was it quite what you expected, or was it more, or how?
There it was pretty close to what I expected, because at that point we had already done the discussion on the physical world, so
Mhm.
we were more on the same page about how I communicate and how she communicates. Um, and there are, of course, anime and manga influences in the spirit world itself, because the spirits are actually based on how uh, fireflies are drawn in anime.
Mm.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
specific point of reference there, the specific inspiration for that. Because
nice.
in my mind, the normal people, the little spirits, that's what they are compared
Hmm.
to these spirit guardians. They're just fireflies.
Yeah, and talk us about your website here. So you've actually got a website of um, it's Mara hyphen comic.com. When did you start to create the website? Was this early in the piece, or was this like in
Yeah,
conjunction
this was
with
early in the process. Um,
Mhm.
my thinking is that, well, there are two major things that led to this. First of all, physical comics are great, but they're less accessible. You know,
Yes,
uh,
I can attest.
digital is way more accessible, and not
Hmm.
everybody is going to have, the means to get physical, because it's going to be more expensive, of course. There
Hmm.
Everything that I do to make the comic digital, I have to do that and more to make it physical. So,
Yeah.
it, you know, also, it's instant. You go to the website and you can read the comic, right?
Hmm.
And also, the other thing is, to have people more invested in it. So when I see a lot of indie comics, and I do support other indie creators. I've worked with others too, like the Glyn and Monsterland. We did a crossover. That was kind of
Okay.
fun. Uh,
Yeah.
but a lot of these comics I've never heard of before their Kickstarter launches.
Hmm. Yeah.
And well, sometimes you'll go there and see, oh, well, this looks cool, I'll support it. But if you're not invested beforehand, you're a lot less likely to do so. At least that's my thinking. I'm not
Yeah.
exactly a marketing guru, but I feel like if you've been reading the comic for a while and you see, oh, it's available physical now, you will have
Hmm.
more of a connection to it.
Yeah. That's true. But also too, shipping is a major hurdle. Like
Yeah.
for example, I see some books that cost like 5 times more for the book than it is for shipping. So like it's a blessing to have the access to the digital books because if they were strictly print, I wouldn't be able to buy half of even most of the books that are available worldwide. So
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, a lot of people just aren't going to be able to buy it at all.
mhm.
For financial situation or shipping situation. So
Yeah.
I feel like, well, I can either have these readers who are reading for free and would have never bought the comic in the first place, or
Mhm.
I could not have those readers, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
I feel
true.
like it's better to have more readers, even if they'll never pay anything for the comic. I'm okay with that because
Yeah,
I'm not. I would love to have this be my job, and I would love to make $1 million on it. But that's not real. What's happening right now? What's happening is I'm putting out a story because I love what I'm doing.
absolutely. And I think that's a really good way to put it because again, like I had a friend of mine who was like complaining that that his book was available through bootleg, but at the same time he's like, well, at least people will read my book.
If someone is if someone is torrenting Mara, um, you don't have to do that. Just go to the website. It'll probably be a lot easier for you.
Exactly. At least you know who's reading it, right? That's
Yeah.
the thing. Yeah. And in terms of the merchandise, were these like art that were brought before the book, or?
These were just art pieces that we liked while creating, and
Mhm.
the this merchandise is mostly just things that I wanted. Honestly,
Mhm.
um, they haven't been wildly popular, but there were things that I wanted, so I put them up in case somebody else also wanted them.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, you are the creator, and you do have the eye for it. So definitely, it's your decision, and I'm sure that people will agree that everything you put up here looks amazing. So so Mara is coming out, or sorry, is already out. At one point, and how will you release issue number two?
We've been releasing issue number two, one page a week on the website.
Hmm.
It comes out early on the Patreon,
Hmm.
because we have our backers there. It's also higher quality there because the
Yeah,
the website, you can't have high quality pages on the website. It would take too long to load.
sure,
The ones I
exactly.
get from Rosie are 15 megabytes and up. So you don't want to load that in the web page.
No, definitely not. Um, but are you going to release like issue number two as a volume?
We want to see how the Kickstarter goes for the first one. I would like
Mhm.
to also I would like to have the other issues in print as we go on, but
Mhm.
issue one is really going to set the stage for Mara in print. Uh,
Yes.
uh, to this point, it's only been digital, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned before with the gaming stories that you were creating earlier in the piece. Are any of those going to be loaded onto Stuffed Rock as well at some point?
I might make the now that you mention it, I might make the sci-fi uh, 2 pages available. Just
Hmm.
just some miscellaneous art for people to have a look at. Because why not, right? It's
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was fun. It's a very different style. It was a different artist doing it,
Mhm.
uh, but it might be something people are interested in.
Yeah, but are you going to consider obviously you must have some data either here or in a computer somewhere. Is that eventually going to reach the service point at any time?
I mean, that's something I wrote quite a long time ago, and it's just not the same quality of writing. Of course, you,
Okay.
I should hope that everybody who does something gets better at it over the
Of
years,
course.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I and as far as other comics go, I mean, I definitely have other scripts. Right,
Mhm.
I have 5 unused scripts sitting on my
Okay.
Google Drive right now. I've got I think the one I'm most excited about is actually a villain protagonist one. You
Okay.
know, um,
Ooh.
and we have a cyberpunk one
Mm-hmm.
waiting in the wings. Of course, a superhero one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a comedy as well. Uh,
Okay.
yeah. So it got a few things waiting, and as far as reviving that specific story, it's not my priority. It might
No,
happen. It
fair
might
enough.
not. I'm not. I don't want to ever say that something won't happen because then it definitely
Mm-hmm.
will.
Yeah, no, well, that's true. I mean, you can always look back and go, "Oh, yeah," and then you can tinker it a bit and make it to a more advanced quality. But I mean, if that's your legacy work, I mean, up to you. But anyway, that's pretty cool. Um, but other than Mara, what's next? So you've got your Kickstarter, which is which is out, and also you got your your what, like, was it one page a week for Mara issue number
Yeah.
2?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what else is new? What else are we expecting to see from Stuffed Rock?
Well, I think we're going to focus on Mara going forward,
Mhm.
because it is a story with a definite end. Right?
Okay.
Not Yeah. It's going to have a set number of issues. It's going to When it's done, it's done. Um,
Yeah, that's good.
yeah. I Because, well, for one thing, I like the neat storytelling where you wrap something up and you're done.
Yeah.
As much as as much as I like Marvel comics, I feel like a lot of the time I get tired of seeing the same character forever, right?
True.
And even you have you have things like Spider-Man being passed down to Miles
Hmm.
Morales. You're still seeing Spider-Man, and there's a different aspect to it. Of course, Miles is his own person, right?
Yeah,
But
different.
you're still seeing Spider-Man,
Yeah.
and
So
we're gonna be seeing Spider-Man for a long time to come.
hmm
And yeah, I just would rather have my own work be self-contained in a set number of issues.
Yes. And without like giving too much away, how many issues would you see in Mara being wrapped up?
So we actually changed the style of storytelling partway through. Originally, it was set to be 20, but then we tightened up the storytelling and made chapters longer. The amount
Hmm.
of chapter 2 that is out now is actually
Yeah.
longer than the total of the first issue.
Okay.
So with those changes in mind, it's looking at like 10.
Okay. Ooh.
Yeah.
Nice. I was expecting you to say like maybe 5 or 6. So 10's a good number.
Yeah. I I have the story written. It needs to be more like a script for
Hmm.
later issues, but issue 3 is already completely written.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I kind of see people do that as well. They write the script first. Once the art is brought forward, then you can focus on more about actually writing the story.
Yeah.
And do you have any? What would be the greatest takeaway that you got from creating Mara that you can pass on to people who are listening that could be thinking about writing their first comic book? What would be something you would offer as guidance or recommendation in their journey?
So I've seen a lot of people say things like, "Oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I
Yeah.
could do a comic." And I don't feel like I did anything that anybody else couldn't do. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
obviously, not everybody's going to write the same
Hmm.
story, but everybody's capable of writing to some degree. Am I a better writer than average? I don't know. That's not really my call, is it? That's everybody else's call. But
Absolutely.
everybody can write to some degree, and
Mhm.
everybody can reach out to artists and hire one. Everybody can put a script together. All of the things I've done, everybody else could do. So
Mhm.
the only thing that's really holding anyone back is thinking that they can't.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. No.
So
Fair.
do
Fair
it.
enough. Just do it. Yes. Exactly. Just do it. Um, and just gonna ask you a couple of wrap up questions now. Um, what music are you listening to? Do you listen to music while you're writing? Um, and if you do, what do you listen to?
I listen to a lot of different genres because you never know
Mm,
where inspiration's going to come from. You know,
true.
I listen to electronic music. I listen to rap. I listen to
Hmm.
uh, you know orchestral, heavy metal, wherever something sticks in my head.
Hmm.
You know, because when I start doing something while listening to music, whether it's working or writing, I'm going to be playing one song on loop because
Yeah.
there's something that's getting the creative juices flowing.
Hmm.
And yeah, I never know what it's going to be before it happens.
No, that's really awesome. And what are you watching at the moment? What's on your Netflix, or what are you watching at the moment?
Well, I'm actually trying to pick something because just last night I finished Inside Job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Reagan Riley is uh, she's a great character. I like that character. I mean, obviously it's a comedy, and she's going to be
Hmm.
overplayed. Um, the but that characterization, I mean, she has pathos and problems, and while they are played up for laughs, they're not really done in a disrespectful way, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I honestly haven't watched it, so I might have to add that to my next to watch list. Well,
It's
Dylan.
it was recommended because I watched Rick and Morty. So
Hmm,
if you like Rick and Morty, you would also like that. I think that's a fair assessment.
great, great. Definitely gonna check it out. And before I let you go, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter /StuffRock, one
Hmm.
word. Also on Facebook, Stuffed Rock Studio, also one word.
Hmm.
Yeah. So those are the main places you can find me, and my DMs are
Hmm.
open if you have a question.
Fantastic. Well, Dylan, thank you so much for joining us for Thinking the Extra. Um, and thank you to everyone who's been watching Thinking the Extra from Comic Crusaders. Please click like and subscribe to get more amazing content from comiccrusaders.com. And this is Dodgy from Thinking the Extra. See you all next time.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this Comic Crusaders production. For real-time news on all things pop culture, please feel free to follow us on social media. For articles, original content, merchandise, and more, please go to www.comiccrusaders.com. Also follow along with all of the websites in the Comic Crusaders family. As always, if you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the Comic Crusaders YouTube channel.